Okay, we are finally at the end of this series, and I just want to say to everyone that I definitely appreciate you coming out and supporting this effort to keep Black History Month alive. There have been so many attacks on Black History Month and just Black studies as a discipline that I just wanted to make sure that I could do my part. And that is something I'm very passionate about. So today we are wrapping up. Remember, I think I said last time that I should have done the women today because today is the beginning of Black Women's History Week, which I started in 2018 to honor Black women at the intersection of Black History Month and Women's History Month. But I was not thinking when I planned this out. So we are rounding this out with African American social philosophers. This one may be a little bit longer just because I usually slate an hour. This one might be a little bit longer because we do have a lot to cover. I just want to give the caveat that I cannot cover everyone. So if you watch this and you're like, why, what about this person? Or why didn't they do this person? Listen, I'm just doing as much as I can to try to contain this. And I just tried to cover different time periods, different theories and different spaces. So hopefully you learn a lot today. Some of these folks may be familiar to you and some of them may not. So I hope that you learn from this workshop. So we're going to start by looking at the origins of Black studies. Now, I just want to say that there are some people I'm talking about who are not necessarily folded into Black studies, but I can make the argument that pretty much every Black scholar is participating in Black studies, right? So we'll just leave that at that. So we're going to do a little bit about the origins of Black studies. We're going to start talking about philosophers throughout history and modern times, of course, and we're going to discuss their major theories and their ideas. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on these folks. Okay, let's see. Let's try to believe this and see if it works. We had some technical difficulties last time. It was really bothering me. Let's see.
If there is violence in the process of waging a revolution, that will be determined by the ruling class. That will be determined by those who hold power. Now, see, let me just give you a small sort of a microcosmic example of what it means. Say a group of people get together and go out and demonstrate in order to dramatize their demands around a particular issue. That's fine if they are able to do this in the way in which they want to. But what happens in many cases, you have police forces unleashed on them because they are peacefully demonstrated. And my position is that we do not stand there and allow ourselves to be shot down and beaten. We have the right, we have the human right to defend ourselves and to defend our principles and defend what we want to do. And so I would say that in the event of violence in a revolution, you always have to see that in the context of defending gains of the people. We have a right to defend those gains.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to start out with Angela Davis, even though I'm actually not profiling her because I've talked about Angela Davis quite a bit in my work. But the reason why I wanted to start out with that clip is because it's an example of her presenting a philosophy. And oftentimes, as a professor, I will ask my students to name, famous philosophers. And of course, they name Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Durkheim, Kant, people like that. Primarily white men, right? White European men. And this is who we have been taught to think of as philosophers, right? But what is a philosopher? A philosopher is someone who creates knowledge, who thinks through things, offers theories, helps us understand the world around us, gives us context for these things, right? That is why a PhD is a doctor of philosophy. These are the people who are coming up with better ways for us to understand things. And unfortunately, due to racism and sexism and homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia, things like that, a lot of people do not get the name of philosopher. And I find that to be incredibly problematic. And so as you sat there and you listened to Angela Davis, she is giving you a theory related to dealing with the police. And we have to start reorienting how we think about philosophy and what it means to be a philosopher. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the origins of Black studies, right? Black studies, also known as African American studies, Africana studies. We now have Africology. Africology is the Afrocentric study of African phenomena. And the reason why that is important is because not all of our education is Afrocentric, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about Dr. Asante. But it originated as a formal academic discipline in the late 1960s. And this was a direct response to the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, right? A lot of, if we were there, I wish I was, maybe some of you were, in the late 70s, early 70s, U.S. campuses were a hotbed of activity around activism and things like that. And so many things were coming out of them, and Black studies is one of them. I'll also note that women's studies also comes from this same tradition of protests, okay? Students making demands, saying that we want educational curricula that reflects our histories, our cultures, our experiences. And so those are two disciplines that I often reference because they are so aligned in how they approach these things. Okay. So a turning point came in 1968. San Francisco State College, which is now San Francisco State University, the Black Student Union aligned with the Third World Liberation Front, and they led a 5-month strike. And that demanded the creation of a Black Studies department. It was the longest student strike in U.S. history, and it led to the establishment of the first Department of Black Studies in the United States. Again, this is super important. We're talking about sustainable action, direct action, protest, boycott, all of those things that we have been proven to move the needle forward. Okay. So some of the core themes of early Black studies is the recovery of African and African American history. This is super, super important to our discipline, making sure that all of the things that have been hidden, all of the lies that have been told, all the things that have been stolen, right, from the brilliance of African people around the world is restored, is recovered, and is shared so that people understand where a lot of these ideas come from, right? There's been long conversation about Greek philosophers getting a lot of their theories and ideas from African scholars, okay? And there's proof of this. We know it happened. So it's really important to reclaim that. Resistance to oppression is a cornerstone of Black studies. Most African-American social philosophers focus on resistance to oppression, right? We live under oppression. Our work is determined to resist that. It also focuses on Black cultural expression and identity. This is super, super important as well. And part of that is tied with the reclamation of history and understanding our culture to be able to express it and make it part of our identity. Pan-Africanism and diasporic unity. This is super important during Black History Month, especially this year when I'm just convinced there's a psyop that is trying to just cause division between people across the diaspora. First and foremost, we are Pan-African. Pan-African means that we care about African people around the world. We understand that we are united in this fight, in this resistance to oppression. And then the final thing is community engagement and social justice. And this is one of the things that makes Black studies kind of stand apart from some of the other disciplines, is that there is a direct commitment to being engaged in our communities and fighting for social justice. We often think of knowledge for liberation, education for liberation, not just knowledge for knowledge's sake. And so if we're going to hop into it, we have to kind of start with the man for whom we have this celebration month, Carter G. Woodson. I always talk about being a daughter of Carter G. Woodson because his work was so critical and so vital. Okay. So he was born in New Canton, Virginia. He left us in 1875. He left us in 1950. He was the son of formerly enslaved parents. And he was largely self-educated as a child. This is something that I think is so important to his narrative, okay? We have to understand that our ancestors at that time did not necessarily have access to educational opportunities. So many people were self-taught. He then went and got his bachelor's degree and master's degree from University of Chicago. He got a PhD in history at Harvard, and he's only the second African-American to earn a PhD in history from Harvard. A lot of people don't know that Carter G. Woodson went to Harvard, right? As a profession, he was a historian, an educator, author, and a journalist. And he is most known for being the creator of Negro History Week, which has grown into Black History Month, which is what we are celebrating. One of my favorite quotations from him is, "If you can control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions." Now, some things that Carter G. Woodson has done that I think are important to share. He founded the Journal of Negro History in 1916. He created scholarly space for rigorous research on Black history when mainstream journals would exclude it, okay? He was really focused on this education. And so everything that you see, he was a teacher, was a journalist, but everything that you're going to see is really about documenting our history and educating and teaching about it. So when he created this journal, he ensured that Black scholars could publish their work independently of white controlled presses, okay? So some of his core theories, using history as a tool of liberation, he believed that history was not neutral. Woodson argued that controlling historical narrative shapes power, identity, and possibility. And for African Americans, learning our history is essential to freedom and self-determination, okay? He often critiqued Eurocentric education. He's one of the first scholars to really call out the Eurocentric nature of our education. And he argued that traditional American education erases and distorts Black contributions and reinforces white supremacy. This concept of miseducation, that is his theory, this theory that people are intentionally miseducated. He focused primarily on African Americans, but we see this now, like, we see what's happening with education in the United States. They are intentionally miseducating young people and keeping them docile by denying them access to the truth. And he also talked within the miseducation theory is that our people are taught to admire others and to despise ourselves. And he said that the schools are the ones who reproduce racial hierarchy instead of challenging it, okay? So these were some like really key things that Carter G. Woodson was offering at a time when people really didn't want to hear this. I got to be honest with you. Carter G. Woodson is not a household name because he also critiqued Black people's reliance on religion, specifically Christianity, okay? And we're going to go to one of my favorite people. If you've ever taken some classes with me or workshops, you know that I love Anna Julia Cooper. I think she is just dynamic. She was just a dynamic woman. She was born in 1858 in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was actually enslaved at birth. And she transitioned in 1964. So she actually lived a lot longer than Carter G. Woodson. She was born to an enslaved mother, and her father was a rapist. She was freed after the Civil War. She went to school at St. Augustine's Normal School. A lot of the schools back then were called normal schools. And she got her PhD in Paris at Sorbonne in 1925. Now, if you do the math, you see the age gap, right? And so I always point to her as inspiration. Like, it's never too late to get an education, okay? I think she was like 57 or something like that when she got it. She was one of the first Black women in the world to earn a doctorate, okay? So she was a scholar, educator, writer, and she is often considered the mother of Black feminism, okay? She was definitely one of the leaders of public intellectual discourse. She was a lecturer. She was in debates about race and gender and democracy. And some of her core theories, was that Black women are a measure of social progress, right? So I have a quotation there. "Only the Black woman can say, when and where I enter, there the whole Negro race enters with me." She argued that the status of Black women is the clearest indicator of society's moral and democratic health. Okay, just want to point out this woman was saying this stuff 100 years ago, and she's a major influence. She also thought her theory of education as a radical act, okay? She believed that education was a tool of liberation, not merely job training. And this kind of folds into someone we're going to talk about in a little bit. But, there was this conflict at this particular time. Like, why are we going to school? Why are we getting an education? Is it to become workers for this industrializing country? Is it for liberation? Is it for our own gratification? So there were a lot of conversations about that. She also, again, early Black feminist thought. She really articulated everything that we kind of know about Black feminism now, that race and gender oppression are inseparable. She called out white women for ignoring the race issue as they were advocating for women's rights. She also called out Black male leadership, who often marginalized women and erased them from conversations. She actually challenged W.E.B. Du Bois as he was pulling together this Pan-African conference, and basically was like, all right, where the women at? Right? So I love her. And I always recommend to people that go look up the letters between Anna Julia Cooper and W.E.B. Du Bois. They're a really fun read. So that's Anna Julia Cooper. And speaking of, we have to talk about W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois he's probably the one person that I think if you ask students about philosophers or American philosophers, his name will actually come up. And it should, right? Like, W.E.B. Du Bois, brilliant, thinker, theorist, activist, all of that. So he was born in 1868 in Massachusetts, and he ended up transitioning in 1963 in Accra. Like many others, he decided to leave the United States because he was like, to hell with this nonsense. He was educated at Fisk University and HBCU, and then he went on to getting his PhD from Harvard in 1895. He was the first African American to earn his PhD before Carter G. Woodson. He did graduate study at the University of Berlin. He's known for being a sociologist, historian, writer, editor, and activist, and he's often called the father of Black sociology. He's a pioneer of scientific sociology, and he conducted one of the first empirical sociological studies in the United States, which we know as the Philadelphia Negro. He did that while at the University of Pennsylvania. He co-founded the Niagara Movement in 1905. He was a founding member of the NAACP in 1909. He was an editor of The Crisis, and one of my proudest things is that I was published in The Crisis. I love that for me. He was also very much a Pan-Africanist, and I think that it's super important to acknowledge that, because Du Bois kind of sets the tone in many ways for how Black scholarship is going to go. And the fact that he rooted it in Pan-Africanism is super, super important, okay? Some of his core theories, his theory of double consciousness, okay? Du Bois introduced the concept of double consciousness in the souls of Black folks, which came out in 1903. He talked about, one of the things he said, one ever feels his two-ness, an American and a Negro. And so this was the first time people started thinking about these identities. Well, not the first time people were thinking about it, but the first time it's really articulated that Black people probably live two different experiences. Interestingly enough, Molefi Asante challenges this and says that we can't be American because what American represents is not who we are as African people. So I love when scholars kind of work with each other, in conversation with each other over time. So he also came up with the theory of the color line. And one of the things, as we have the quotation there, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And he was arguing that racism was structural, that it was global, that it's central to capitalism, imperialism, and modernity. And he also made it clear that it's not just about people being prejudiced, that racism is something that is deeply embedded in our institutions and pretty much every aspect of society. He also had the theory of the talented 10th, and he argued that educating the most intellectually gifted African Americans would uplift the whole race, okay? And a lot of times people get prickly about this, right? I'm going to just go on record and say that he's not wrong, right? That this idea, I mean, across every group, there will always be that kind of core group of the highest thinkers and the leaders, the intellectual leaders who help shape the culture. They document the culture, help create the culture, observe the culture, and things like that. That is not to say that other people do not contribute to it. Absolutely, they do. But there are some people, I would say it as like, To whom much is given, much is expected. So basically, if you have the access to go to Harvard in the 1800s as a Black person, you have a responsibility to do this work to try to continue to uplift your race, because the majority of our people were not going to be able to get that level of education. Now, he moved away from this, right? And he moved away from this. And he did not oppose mass education. He wanted everyone educated, and he started to take on more socialist approaches, right? And so, W.E.B. Du Bois is a great example of someone's philosophical leanings and grounding evolving over time. And that's a great philosopher, right? That's a great thinker. You are supposed to evolve over time. You're supposed to learn new things and pull it in. He was a huge critic of capitalism and colonialism, but he always reiterated that capitalism depended on racial exploitation. Okay. Now, we can't talk about W.E.B. Du Bois without talking about Booker T. Washington. And I think a lot of times conversations around Booker T. Washington get muddled, right? Sometimes people who don't have a lot of deep insight into who these people were or what they stood for can kind of come up with very simple dichotomies, like W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T, Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, and people will tend to align with one or the other. But all of them have good qualities, and all of them ultimately, I believe, deep down, maybe a little bit deeper for Booker T. Washington, wanted Black people to live their best lives and be able to live their best lives without oppression, okay? So he was born in Virginia. He was also enslaved at birth in 1856. He was an Aries, which explains so much, but okay. He too, he transitioned in 1915. Actually, like, that's kind of cut off considering how long other Black folks were starting to live after emancipation. But he worked in the mines, and he was a laborer while he was pursuing his education. He went to Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, which is now known as Hampton University. He was an educator, an author, an institution builder, and considered a race leader. I have to make this very clear. Booker T. Washington was probably the most famous Black person in the world at this time. Like, this is like no hyperbole. And a lot of people may not understand this, like definitely within the United States, but even in the world, I would say he traveled all over the place, giving speeches, going to conferences, and talking a lot about this. Excuse me. But also, what's really important when we say that he's an institution builder, he's the founder and the first president of Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, which is now known as Tuskegee University, right? So the school, he built a school. And I don't care what anybody says. Ain't many Black folks, activists, philosophers, things like that, built their own schools. And so many people have graduated from Tuskegee and gone on to do really amazing things in their lives. So we have to give him props for being able to do this in 1881, okay? Talking like right after Reconstruction ends, they tell Black people to go to hell. They ain't gonna help us do nothing anymore. After building all these different HBCUs, he goes and he's like, I'm going to do this. And he's one of the few African Americans who's a founder and first president of an HBCU. He became a national spokesperson, and that is where a lot of people, you know, have some feelings around things. He did have the ear of presidents, okay? He wrote a book called Up From Slavery in 1901. It's considered one of the most widely read autobiographies. He really is considered an architect of educational infrastructure, okay? And not only did he build Tuskegee, he helped establish hundreds of Black schools through philanthropy networks, through, you know, he raised funds, often from white people, to build these Black institutions. So some of his core theories, he really believed in industrial education and economic self-sufficiency. He believed that our focus should focus on vocational industrial skills, because he recognized that the United States was rapidly being industrialized and should, you know, we need to be on top of that, right? And yes, getting education and being able to talk about German philosophy is great. But right now, this country is rebuilding itself. And what role are Black people going to play? Are we going to be involved, or are we going to get left behind? So he focused on agriculture and trades and craftsmanship, all these things that are essential to an industrializing nation, right? He believed that economic independence was the foundation of freedom. Okay, so not having to rely on white people for money to, to be able to live. When you come on, like, let's talk about this. When you think about it, the man ain't wrong. Okay. But he was one of those people, and we could call him a black capitalist because he is one of those people that believed that if you were financially stable, it would gradually lead to social and political rights. And he was very much about gradual progress. He was just like, we will get there eventually. At the Atlanta Compromise, so the Atlanta Exposition Address in 1895, he argued that Black people should temporarily accept segregation and that we should focus on our economic expansion within our own spaces. We should focus more on getting our money up instead of trying to be represented in politics. He's like, this government ain't seeing it for us, so why are we trying so hard to be a part of it? He basically was like, we can create our own communities and be fine. We just have to believe that we can. And that kind of went against the folks at the time who were pushing for inclusion. Some were pushing for assimilation, and they wanted representation in this government. He said, in all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. Okay. This is the speech that actually propelled him to the spotlight, and it was incredibly controversial. W.E.B. Du Bois definitely had some conflicts, and so that's why I want to move real quick and just to give you a little history of their beef.
One of the first moments where Du Bois comes onto the national stage is the brewing controversy between his ideas about racial progress and how to move the race forward, and the leading African-American figure of that time period, the late 19th and early 20th century, Booker T. Washington. In the beginning, they agreed on many points about the importance of education and moving the race forward. It turns out, though, that because Du Bois was Northern born and had access to some of the best schools in New England and really was encouraged to think broadly, it's been part of his elite graduate education, being trained in Berlin, working with Max Weber. By contrast to Booker T. Washington, who was self-educated, a very gifted and talented man, but he was born as a slave. That fundamental difference certainly shaped their sense of change over time. The life that Booker T. Washington eventually led as the leading, most recognized figure of African American society meant that his expectations for what the white race was willing to do on behalf of Black people were very different than of Du Bois. You could say Du Bois was a utopian idealist in some respects, and Booker T. Washington was a pragmatist, better known as an accommodationist. And so it set up an ongoing debate. Eventually, Booker T. Washington's.
Okay, so I just wanted to, I'll leave it there because I just wanted to get to the crux. Oh, you said you're not sure if the chat is working for everyone. Uh-oh, that's not good. I'm sorry, guys. I really am. I don't know what's going on. Again, I've been having all kinds of technical difficulties, but I'll say this. Okay, so part of why that was important is because of that difference, the Northern versus the Southern experience, right? African Americans, particularly those that were born free in the North, had access to different things that folks in the South had access to. And one of the things that Booker T. Washington was saying was that I know white people, they ain't gonna get there with us. They're just not. And here's what we need to do instead. And so I try to encourage people to think of them together and in concert with each other. So there's that. So I want to move us forward to Huey P. Newton. And yes, I have jumped over a few decades. And there's a reason for that. I would say this. In the first half of the 20th century, Many of the people that I just spoke about were the leading thinkers and the folks who were producing most of the knowledge and the information. As Jim Crow began to take, to really take hold in our country, we found a lot of people just were not able to access higher education. That does not mean that they were not philosophical, or that they weren't coming up with ideas, because they absolutely were. But in terms of people that we can look to who were producing kind of almost culture shifting ideas, they were the bulk of the folks that were doing that kind of work. And like I said, I can't include everybody. So I am going to move forward. I am moving forward to the Black Power movement. I did not include Dr. King or Malcolm X in this because I have taught about them extensively in other workshops. I think that they're also two widely known folks that I think most people can say that they are philosophers, and they are two of our greatest African-American philosophers. But I want to go forward to Huey Newton. The reason why I'm going to Huey Newton is because a lot of people don't necessarily think of him as a philosopher, but they should. He was born in February of 1942 in Monroe, Louisiana, and he died, transitioned in 1989 in Oakland, California. He was raised in California. And so that is also something that is a bit different, because so many of our philosophers either come from the Southeast or the Northeast. And so him being raised in California, Californians were dealing with a lot of different things. And remember, San Francisco State is where we get Black Studies. So that is also in California. So there was some revolutionary action going out there. He went to Merritt College, then he went to UC Santa Cruz, and he got his PhD, and his coursework was in the history of consciousness. And his dissertation, you should read it. Some people, it's somewhat incomplete, but you should read it still. He still is a doctor, Dr. Huey Newton. And he was a revolutionary theorist. He was an activist. He was a writer. He's known for being a co-founder and chief theorist of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And so he's important because when we think about the Black Power movement, we have to talk about the Black Panthers. They were the predominant group that was kind of shaping not only what we were doing, but how we were thinking and what we were trying to build. And Huey Newton is the one who really developed its ideological framework and its political philosophy. He also was the author of their 10-point program, okay? And that program was a radical platform. It demanded freedom, housing, education, healthcare, and an end to police violence, okay? So to be able to come up with a manifesto, right, a 10-point program, these are our demands as African Americans, was really important at the time. He was arrested several times. He'd been through a lot. The end of his life, look, there's some skeletons in his closet as well, right? And as there are with all of some of our top people and the complications of things. But he was, some of his major theories were, one was revolutionary intercommunalism, okay? He argued that traditional nation states had been weakened by global capitalism and US imperialism. He proposed revolutionary intercommunalism, and that held that oppressed communities worldwide share the same struggles. Right. So within the Black Power movement, within the Pan-African movement, there's a lot of conversation about how whiteness is the enemy. White supremacy, fabricated white supremacy is the enemy. And oppressed communities around the world, we all have common struggles. We all need to link up because we need to fight against this common enemy. And he believed that liberation work must be international and it must be collective. He believed that solidarity should replace nationalism. And he's one, his thinking and with others is why I'll never be a nationalist. I'll never be somebody who pledges allegiance to a flag or sings a national anthem, because to me, nationalism makes no sense. These are arbitrarily designed borders. We have no claims to any of them. I do not understand national pride and nationalism. I just don't, right? Another theory is that self-defense is a human right. He rejected the nonviolence as a universal strategy. He argued that armed self-defense is legally and morally justified, okay? He took the Second Amendment, which says that the people have the right to form, to bear arms and form a militia to take on the, being attacked by the state. And he recognized that the police were a state that was terrorizing Black communities. Therefore, the Black people had a right to form a militia and defend themselves against a terrorist state. and when you look at Revolutionary Suicide, which is one of his, it's his autobiography, but also one of his prominent works, he emphasized that people must survive before we can revolt. And that's why they came up with things like the free breakfast program, free health clinics, community schools, and clothing and food distribution, because he was like, you cannot fight this fight without help. He also theorized that most of us will not get to this place of liberation or freedom in our lifetimes on this plane, but we have to continue to work towards that. And that's that idea of revolutionary suicide, which is echoed by Dr. King. He says, I might not get there with you, right? So this concept and this theory that many activists since then have embraced is like, all the work that I'm doing is just to move us forward. Here's a little clip. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but it's a little clip of Huey Newton being interviewed while he was incarcerated.
As far as the proceedings thus far, that the courts have only reflected the racist attitude of the general power structure, that I haven't received a fair trial, that I should not have been indicted in the first place. I was indicted by a blue ribbon grand jury, a middle-class white grand jury that did not represent a cross-section of the community. And
you say you...
Okay, so I just wanted to show you just a little clip. I like to have people hear these folks. Anytime we can get some video or something like that we could hear the people there. And I'm not sure what's going on in the chat. If you can hear me, see if you can put something in the chat. If I need to try to change the settings, and I will, but I'm going to continue with bell hooks. Or if you're here and you have my phone number, send me a text message and let me know if something's going on with the chat. All right. So I want to also bring in to the conversation. You can hear me? Okay, great. Just making sure. Okay. I want to bring in Bell Hooks, right? She was born Gloria Jean Watkins, 1952, in Kentucky. She transitioned just a few years ago in 2021. She stylizes her name, Bell Hooks, as lowercase, which honors her maternal great-grandmother and emphasizes ideas over ego. She does not want this to be about her, but rather the ideas that she's sharing. She got her BA from Stanford University. She got her MA from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and she got her PhD from UC Santa Cruz. And I just want to point out again that California has been a space for radical Black thought to thrive. And so many of our philosophers, especially in the second half of the 20th century, did go to California to get their educations or a higher education, right? She was a scholar, a writer, a cultural critic, and an educator. Her areas were Black feminism, cultural studies, education, and media criticism. And I love her media critiques. I use her in my work all the time. And she was known for writing that kind of bridges academic theory and accessible everyday language. And one of the reasons why people love Bell Hooks so much is because she's pretty easy to read. And I would say her later works are easier than some of her early, more theoretical feminist works, but she's accessible. And that is really important to people, especially when folks may be struggling with literacy or they have not had access to higher education. What's the point of being a philosopher if people don't know what you're talking about, right? All right. So some of her major theories, of course, feminism is for everybody. She defined feminism as a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. And so her idea is that everybody should be down with that, right? Regardless of gender, race, class, everybody should be down with that. She rejects feminism as being anti-men. This idea that feminism is anti-men, she rejects that. She critiqued white middle-class feminism for ignoring race and class. She insisted that feminism must be inclusive, okay? Another theory is the interlocking systems of oppression. And we get this coined by our good sis, Kimberly Crenshaw, a couple of decades later with intersectionality. But I tell everybody that, yes, Sister Crenshaw coined this term, but we had several Black women who were doing this work going all the way back to Anna Julia Cooper, right? So she emphasized that racism, sexism, capitalism, and imperialism all operate together. And this idea of imperialism continues to come up. And it's one of the things that I think some of our modern philosophers are losing sight of. Imperialism, right? and probably because we haven't had any recent wars, right? Like that we've been touched by, right? We haven't had a draft, we haven't had those things. So we're not necessarily thinking about the ways that the United States is an imperialist force. But people like her and Huey and Martin and Malcolm and all these folks often thought about American imperialism and American hegemony, right? She says that the liberation requires dismantling of all systems, not just one, right? She later in her work, she emphasized that love as a political practice. And so she's got this trilogy of books that are focused on love. And in this, she is framing love as this like political act. And it's really interesting because within Black studies, there's not a whole lot of talk about love and sex and pleasure and things like that. I know, yeah. Our discipline, unfortunately, tends to focus a lot on trauma. So Bell Hooks is really bringing in a new conversation when she released the trilogy of those books. Another theory, and my favorite theory of hers, is a theory of the oppositional gaze. This is a media theory, and Bell Hooks says that Black women have the right to critique what we see in terms of artistic productions by, say, Black men, or artistic productions that depict us in a certain way. If we don't like it, we have the right to say it, and we don't have to be quiet just because it's, you know, because of a scarcity mindset, right? So for example, Spike Lee makes the film Crooklyn, which is a really great film, you know, about a family in Brooklyn, loosely based on his own life or what have you. And she writes a pretty scathing critique of it, but she's right in what she's saying, right? And so her theory of the oppositional gaze is that, yes, we want to celebrate Spike Lee as being like one of the few people, Black directors, able to get these kind of major deals and have these major, you know, productions. But also, I don't like this, you know, and I don't like this, and I have the right to say why I don't like it without being seen as an enemy of my people. So that was an important one. We're going to move to Molefi Asante, probably one of the most important African-American social philosophers of all time. He was born in 1942 in Valdosta, Georgia. He got his PhD from UCLA in 1968, again, UCLA, California, right? And he gets it in communication studies because at the time, they don't have Black studies, right? But in his focus, he was definitely focused on Black people. He is known for developing the theoretical framework of Afrocentricity. And this is super important. I just want to pause here, and I'm going to play a little clip from him. But a lot of people use Afrocentricity and Afrocentric incorrectly. Being Afrocentric is not about wearing natural hair or changing your name to an African name or wearing Ankara or dashikis or anything like that. That is an aesthetic, that is negritude, that is not what Afrocentricity is. Afrocentricity is about centering African people in their own narratives, in our study, making sure that our perspectives come from the inside out rather than being we are the subject of our own stories instead of being the objects of others. And this is also, you can look at feminist standpoint theory, Afrocentricity is a standpoint theory. So there's a lot of alignment there as well. Dr. Asante has written over 100 books. Okay. We just have to, most prolific Black writer in terms of professors and philosophers and stuff. I mean, nobody else has written over 100 books, you know? And one of his most popular ones is Afrocentricity, the Theory of Social Change, which kind of kicks all of this off. Some of the critiques of him was early on having a homophobic stance. And as him being my mentor and being a queer person, I will attest that Dr. Asante has definitely changed and evolved, as we were talking about earlier with philosophers evolving. And he has owned that, and he has apologized for his past statements. And he said that it was through knowing queer people that he got to better understand their experiences. And for him, if you are African, you are African, you are African. And so he's definitely changed his stance on a lot of those things. So that's important to note. He also founded the first PhD program in African American Studies, and that was at Temple University in 1984. So Temple University, where I got my degree, is the oldest PhD program for Black Studies in the country. And here's a little clip that we're going to just listen to him really quickly, in his own words, explain what Afrocentricity is.
Well, Afrocentricity is a paradigm that says that African people must view themselves and be viewed as subjects of our own history and our own narrative, and that we are essentially mature and better off if we see ourselves as agents of history rather than as marginals to the European history or the Arab history or anybody else's history. We are centered within our own narrative, and we must use that centeredness as the point of our own investigations and inquiry.
Dr. Asante is known for his location theory. Location theory is this idea that Africans across the diaspora are people who have been stolen from their home. They've been dislocated, not just physically, but psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, everything dislocated and placed in hostile territory around the world, particularly in the West. And so that we are all African people. We have to, in order to understand our experiences, we have to look at the environment in which we've been dislocated. And its location theory is also expansive in that it helps us when we go back and do research. We need to locate people where they were. So we can't apply like a 2026 mindset and frame of reference to what people were experiencing like in the 1950s or the 1850s. And unfortunately, we tend to do that. We tend to say, well, I would never, do blah, blah, blah. Well, you don't know what you would do because you weren't there in that time and space. And that serves as a precursor for Afrofuturism, which we will talk about in a little bit. All right. So now we have Derek Bell. Derek Bell, again, one of the most important thinkers, not just African American, but just American and just people in the world. Okay. Derek Bell was born in 1930 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he transitioned in 2011. He got his bachelor's degree from Duquesne, and he went to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. He was a civil rights lawyer, a law professor, and a legal theorist. He was a foundational architect of critical race theory, this thing that everybody talks about but has no real understanding of, right? This idea, CRT, that has been weaponized by racists and conservatives who want to scare people. And we know that CRT is not taught in kindergarten. So, it's a whole lot of things. But he was the first tenured Black professor at Harvard Law School. He later taught at NYU and the University of Oregon. One of his quotations is, "Power in the hands of the reformer is no less potentially corrupting than in the hands of the oppressor," which is really important, an important statement on the risks and the possibilities that, just because you have been oppressed, it doesn't mean that you won't become and act like an oppressor once you get a little bit of power, right? He challenged liberal civil rights frameworks that assumed steady racial progress. If you think about, we go back to Booker T. Washington, who believed that we should have incremental progress and things like that. He was against that. He's like, it's not happening. Like we're not making the moves forward that we think we are. And it's almost like there's this kind of like weird boomerang that happens. Again, like they say, you go one step forward, you go two steps back, right? He did a lot in the fight for school desegregation. And he often, one of the cool things about him is that he used narrative storytelling to be able to get, these, to expose legal contradictions, right? Use narratives, use allegories. So his core theories: one, racism is permanent. It ain't going nowhere. Racism is a permanent feature of American society. He didn't say that we shouldn't resist. He didn't come from a place of like resistance is futile. He said that racism adapts rather than disappears. And this, come on, like this is brilliant. Like this, like we're not getting rid of this, right? And so sometimes when you hear me like talking, people just like, oh, you're such a pessimist and things like that. It's like, no, I'm not. It's not that I'm pessimist. It's that I understand the truth, Racism ain't going nowhere. They work too hard to make it what it is. And all that's going to happen is it's going to adapt. And if you're, in the United States and you see what United States is post-Obama, you see that racism is adapting, right? He also had a theory of interest convergence. He argued that racial justice advances only when it converges with white interests. Your man was spitting hot fire, okay? He said that the only time we make racial progress is if white people allow it. And it has to benefit them in some way, right? If it does not benefit white people for us to make progress, we will not make progress. You got to sit with that for a second, okay? And he was definitely a critique of liberalism, all of this like colorblindness nonsense, incremental reform. He had no faith in neutrality or objectivity. He was a very radical thinker, and we can really appreciate that. So I just want to show you one of my little favorite clips, because he has like I said, he used narrative storytelling and allegory, and he's got one of my favorite things called the Space Traders. And the premise is basically that aliens are offering a lot of like money and military support if they send all the black people. if our countries send all the black people, or people with a certain amount of melanin in their skin, if they're allowed to take them, then they'll exchange it for all this money. So here's a quick clip from this.
Yes, talk to me.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I love your show,
Thank you,
Bertice.
thank you.
I watch it every day.
No.
But my comment is this. Black people have
realize
always
my
been
husband has done
complaining
Donahue
about how
several
bad they're
times,
treated
but he
here,
has
so I
nothing
would
to
think
say
they'd
on
just
the
be
matter right
tickled
now.
pink to get a free ride someplace else.
Oh, yes, the free ride is fine. It's the return ticket I'm worried about, okay?
Well, Dad, it looks like your chickens are finally coming home to roost.
Look, little Miss Militant. I mean, give Dad a break, all right? How was he supposed to know? Besides, I'm sure this will all blow over in a couple of days. Right, Dad?
All right.
We're going to take a break right.
So yeah, as you can see, Robert Guillaume is playing a black conservative who is part of the government and kind of working with this plot. And then his daughter is a little like, daddy, stupid. And his son obviously has a white girlfriend and falls in line. But go watch it. It's really funny. Cosmic Slop. Go look up Cosmic Slop, Derek Bell on YouTube, and it's going to pull up the whole thing for you. So there's several vignettes. All right. So now we've got Anita Allen. Anita Allen was born in 1953. She was raised in a working class family, first generation college grad. She went to the New College of Florida for her bachelor's, University of Michigan for her master's and PhD in philosophy, and then she went to Harvard Law School. She's a law professor, philosopher, and a legal ethicist. And she's a professor of philosophy at University of Pennsylvania, my alma mater. Her focus has been on privacy law, bioethics, feminist legal theory, and philosophy of law. And one of the things that I love about her is that she really focuses on privacy and bodily autonomy, and like, what does privacy mean? And as we are under this growing surveillance state, she's one of the leading thinkers and one of the first people to really be like, hey, we should be paying attention to how much surveillance is going on, and that we have been robbed of our privacy. One of her quotations is, privacy and accountability, each in their own way, render us more fit for valued forms of social participation. So she basically was saying in this article that she wrote that, like, yes, we have a right to privacy, but we also need to be hold ourselves accountable to how we show up in our society. So some of her core theories are that privacy is a moral and legal right. Okay, she argues that privacy is not merely about secrecy, but it's about dignity, human dignity, autonomy, control over your personal information and bodily access. Okay, she challenged views that a person being private is not hiding something; they just have the right to be free in their privacy. She also developed feminist privacy theory. And she critiqued how privacy had historically been used to shield domestic violence and gender oppression. Okay. And that is really important in kind of how we think about feminist work. Like, we can theorize on feminism, but how we think about the work of it. And part of it is unmasking and lifting the veil on what goes on, right? And so she argued that we sometimes hide behind privacy, and that can be dangerous for people. She was really big on consent and thinking about coercion and power. She's like, power imbalances distort choice. So she's a theorist. She's one of the theorists who said that people can't really make choices when when they can't consent, or when they're in dynamics that deny them power. And so we think about something like slavery. There's no consent under slavery, right? As long as you are owned and controlled by someone else, you cannot consent to things, right? So she talked a lot about that. So shout out to Anita Allen. Got to hit up brother Cornel West. How do we do this without talking about Cornel West? You know, Cornel has been, coming back into the conversations more as we're talking about the stuff that's going on in our country with ICE and things like that. So it's been cool to kind of see him on the screen. So he was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1953. He is obviously still with us. He was raised in California as well. Again, there's a theme here, right? There's a big theme here. But he was also deeply shaped by the Black church and jazz and civil rights. If I'm not mistaken, he's like a reverend too. Like he's like an ordained minister of some sort. He's got his bachelor from Harvard, his MA and PhD he did at Princeton. He used to teach at Princeton. He's taught at a number of schools, but he comes out of this kind of Princeton School of Black thought. Definitely theologian, political critic, public intellectual, former professor at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Union Theological Seminary, which is like the best seminary that people can go to in this country. Some of his theories, and so one of the things that Cornel West has pushed a lot is public scholarship beyond the academy. This knowledge should not just be housed in these ivory towers. It should be made accessible to everyone. He's one of his theories of prophetic pragmatism. He looks at American pragmatism, Christian prophetic traditions, Black freedom struggles, and pulls them all together. This theory of prophetic pragmatism emphasizes moral accountability, democratic action, truth-telling grounded in love and justice. And this is where he and Bell Hooks align in a lot of ways. They both center love in a lot of their later works, especially. And then Race Matters. He wrote a book, Race Matters, in 1993. He also is saying that racism is structural, not attitudinal. And he asserts that moral decay, not just policy failure, undermines democracy, right? So Black folks tend to look at people's spirituality more, I've found, when it comes to philosophers. And that is because it is a very African thing to do, African cosmology. We are a people who believes that we are part of the world around us. We are not better than anything or anyone around us. And how we navigate is really directly related to how we connect to the people and things around us. So it makes sense that this idea of morality comes up in a lot of Black social philosophers. And one area we disagree on, he believes that nihilism is a threat to Black communities. And I understand why, because if there's a wholesale embrace of nihilism, our communities will be affected the most. But I can also make the argument for why Black nihilism exists as well. And that kind of folds into the Afro-pessimism and what they talk a lot about as well. All right. Speaking of, we can move to Joy James. While she might not be classed as a Afro-pessimist, I do think she has some Afro-pessimist leanings. She has definitely been an inspiration to me as well. And so she was born in 1962. She is a political theorist and scholar and editor. She went to St. Mary's of Maryland. She got her PhD from Yale in political science. She's been a professor at Williams College, formerly at Brown and Dartmouth. Her areas are Black political thought, abolition theory, state violence, feminist and radical theory. She's known for the theory of the captive maternal. And I actually use the theory of the captive maternal in my work when I was developing the theory of the liberated maternal. And basically this idea that Black women, particularly Black mothers, have basically been held against their wills as producers of labor, as an integral part of capitalism, Western capitalism, that Black women have not been able to experience freedom because of the role that we play and how we are held captive by the oppressions that we experience as Black people, as women, etc. Okay. One of her quotations, "We charge the American government with genocide. In clear, unequivocal terms, we charge the American government with genocide against the captive Black people in America who are perpetually under siege," right? And so Afro-pessimists tend to look at kind of the world that we're in as like, it's just a constant attack on who we are as Black people. Like every single element, like we are constantly living under oppression, under threat, under siege. And so she is somebody who comes out and says that this is the fault of the American government and that they made it and they perpetuate it and they're not really trying to let it go. So that is Dr. Joy James. Then we have Dr. Reynaldo Anderson. I haven't been calling any of these people doctor. I got to get better at that. So Dr. Anderson is actually a friend of mine, but I think he's important because, and I think that not enough people are as familiar with him and his work. And so we're going to talk about Afrofuturism. We absolutely have to talk about him. And so he was born, I had to text him. I was like, where were you born? So he was born in Japan. He was actually born in Okinawa in 1964. He graduated from Jackson State and Oklahoma State, and then he went to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So he was doing a lot of stuff in the Midwest, and that was military related. He was also in the Marine Corps. He's currently an associate professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University. He is the executive director and co-founder of the Black Speculative Arts Movement. Now, the Black Speculative Arts Movement has been super, super important in this movement for Afrofuturism and understanding how art intersects with this meta theory. He's a co-editor of Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness, and the Black Speculative Arts Movement, Black Futurity, Art and Design. He's a key theorist of Afrofuturism, and he helped formalize Afrofuturism as a field within Africana and Black studies. He elevated Afrofuturism as a philosophy, as a methodology, and as a political critique. And he tries to create a bridge between culture and theory. His core theories: Afrofuturism as Black speculative thought. He argues that Afrofuturism is not only about the future, it is about reimagining the past, critiquing the present, reclaiming Black intellectual traditions that have been erased by Western modernity, and how we imagine Black people existing in the future. For him, Afrofuturism becomes a counter archive that restores Black people as thinkers, inventors, and futurists. Another theory is about time, memory, and the afterlife of slavery. Central to his work is the idea that Black people experience time non-linearly. Okay, so again, going back to this African cosmology and our spirituality, we are just different in how we not only experience the world, but how we show up in the world. And so a lot of times we talk about, oh, Black people be on CP time, colored people time, we're always late for things, whatever. He would be one of those people like, what is time? What is time, really? Time is a Western construct, right? He believes also that slavery, colonialism, and racial violence shape both memory and our futurity. That speculative narratives allow Black communities to confront historical trauma while imagining liberation, right? You've seen that that art installation, there are Black people in the future. It's a rather simple statement, but it is an affirming statement that we will be here in the future. Whatever they're doing, we're still going to find ways to be here in the future. So Afrofuturism kind of operates in this healing kind of way. And then he looks at science fiction as political theory, right? He treats science fiction and fantasy as sites of philosophical inquiry, as critiques of empire and critiques of capitalism, critiques of racial hierarchy. And he believes that within this kind of science fiction and fantasy, we can develop blueprints for alternative social orders. Okay. We've got Moya Bailey. See, we're all in the 21st century now, so this is great. We've got Moya Bailey. She was born in 1983. Okay, she's a cultural theorist, professor, writer, and a digital humanities scholar, right? Digital humanities has grown in popularity in recent years, and it's very important considering the digital world that we now live in. She got her PhD from Emory in women, gender, and sexuality. Professor at Northwestern. She was also at Yale and some other institutions. Her focus are Black feminism, media studies, digital culture, gender, and sexuality. And she is known for coining and theorizing on misogynoir. And misogynoir describes the unique intersection of anti-Black racism and misogyny experienced by Black women. Some of the key characteristics are gendered racism, sexualized and racial stereotypes, violence that is both symbolic and material. And unlike general misogyny or racism, misogynoir targets Black women specifically, not incidentally, right? And that's where we get a little bit of a difference from intersectionality, for example. She's saying that what Black women experience at the intersection of these oppressions is intentional. It's not happenstance. Another theory is naming as power. She emphasizes that naming oppression is a political act, and by giving language to it, to like say misogynoir, for example, Black women have been able to identify patterns rather than isolated incidents, okay? She also argues that communities can organize and resist more effectively when we name the harms, okay? One of her quotations is, I feel like humans always resist, humans always find a way to imagine and move things a little bit, always, okay? So she does a lot of work around digital humanities, looking at fandoms, looking at Black feminist communities in these digital spaces. And she featured me in a book. All right. And of course, we have the C. Riley Snorton. C. Riley Snorton is a transgender man who is an activist and a scholar and was born in the Bronx, baby. I believe in 1981. Born in the Bronx, but raised in South Carolina, which is a very interesting kind of mix of upbringing, bringing that northern urban life and then that southern life, right? Got an AB in Women and Gender Studies from Columbia, an MA in Communication from Penn, PhD in American Studies from University of Minnesota. Currently, I believe, a professor of English and Gender and Sexuality Studies at University of Chicago, used to be faculty at Cornell. Black Studies is the focus, transgender studies, gender and sexuality. And Snorton is known mostly for the foundational work in theorizing Black trans history and embodiment. Okay. One of the quotations is that passing expresses a form of agency as well as a promise of restoration, which is to say that passing as a limited durational performance signals a return to a natural biological mode of being. I just want to say that C. Riley Snorton's work is very dense. I try to teach it to my students, and it's a struggle every time. But again, not everybody focuses on like certain levels of accessibility, and that's okay. It is what it is. They're going to write and they're going to theorize in the way that they do. One of their major theories is that Blackness is foundational to transgender history. That Blackness is central, it's not peripheral, right, to the history of gender variance. And this is an Afrocentric approach, right? Blackness is central. And the reason why is because understanding trans identity, it predates Western notions of gender, right? And so we can't talk about being trans without talking about being Black, right? Let's see, and this is where kind of the Afro-pessimism comes in. One of the ways that they think about things is Black bodies were sites where sex, gender, and humanity were violently contested. Trans identity cannot be fully understood apart from race. And they reframe trans history as inseparable from the history of racialization. And then also there's their theory of fungibility and afterlife of slavery. Again, it's a little dense, but it makes sense. Snorton says that uses fungibility to describe how enslaved Black bodies were rendered interchangeable. And when we say interchangeable, we're like, in this instance, we're talking about gender, okay? And that's part of the Afro-pessimist ungendering, right? That like Black women are not women Black men are not men in these Western constructs because they did not allow us the humanity of that kind of gender binary. And when I say humanity, humanity in their terms. But when we look at it from an Afrocentric and an African perspective, we are not beholden to their ideas of gender. And therefore, transness is almost inherent to Black identity because we do not fall into those binaries, right? That's pretty dope, ain't it, right? Gotta love these theories and the way that we think about these things. And the final thing that I'll say about Snorton is that they critique visibility as kind of liberation, right? There's limits to that. The more visible you are as queer, and within queerness, within transness, the more susceptible you are to violence. He argues that visibility can increase vulnerability for Black trans people, and recognition does not guarantee protection, right? And we know this, that when the liberals want to be inclusive, they often leave out the threats of structural violence and they don't acknowledge the threats of structural violence and actually leave that structural violence intact, okay? So I think they said something, I think he's saying something smart. I'm just putting it out there. And we got one more. I told you it was gonna be a little bit longer, but I absolutely am gonna talk about myself. I don't care, debate with your mama, okay? Because I am an African-American social philosopher, and I'm very proud to be one. I was born in 1979 in New York City, baby, representing, again, it's kind of that Northeast experience, which is different. I'm not saying it's better, I'm not saying it's worse, it's just different. I do identify as a Black feminist and African womanist. I am a cultural theorist, a professor, a writer, and an activist. I got my bachelor's from the University of Pennsylvania, my MSW from City University of New York, and my PhD from Temple University. Two of my major theories are that allies don't exist and that we are instead co-conspirators. If you see people talking about that, they got that from me. Okay. Also, I've developed Afrocentric film theory. It's the first of its kind. And I'm still developing the methodologies for this. I have one methodology that I did develop for my dissertation, but my hope is to continue to expand. And the basic premise of Afrocentric film theory is that we cannot analyze films that include Black people without using Afrocentric theory and frameworks to do the analysis. And so just fundamentally, and it's very similar to feminists, like you can't analyze films where women are there without using a feminist lens. And so that is what Afrocentric film theory says. You cannot analyze films that are either made by Black people, feature Black people, tell Black stories or whatever, using Eurocentric film theories, because they will never adequately apply to us, right? So that's my theoretical contribution as a social philosopher. And I'm known for talking about Black women in social media, film and media theory, and for developing Sankofa Summer School, which to my understanding is the first Afrocentric virtual academy in the United States. And so we are going on year 6 this year, and I will be putting out a call for proposals to get some folks to come and teach this year. So, I just wanted to shout out myself, because why not? Right? Why not? This is my show, right? This is my thing. So I thank you all for being here tonight. I really appreciate you. If you're watching the replay, thank you so much. I know so many people watch the replay and kind of get this knowledge. Once I make all of these public, you can share them far and wide. I hope that you were able to learn something today. I don't know what's going on with the chat. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I know I had tried to put a comment in the chat earlier and YouTube rejected it, saying that it was spam. And I was like, no, it's not spam. But I do want to thank everybody who has supported this entire series, who continues to support my work. I really appreciate it. I'm all about knowledge for liberation. And I'm all about being a public scholar and taking it out of the ivory tower and making sure that as many people can access this stuff as possible. Doing it during Black History Month has been an honor for me, and you all showing up has been a wonderful, wonderful honor. Thank you, Dr. Hall. I appreciate you for being here. Thank you for celebrating the work that we're doing here. And I am tired. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, go get some dinner or something if you haven't eaten already. And I will see you all next time. Take care.